Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be giving some tips for the ladies on how to attract a masculine man, a provider man. Tip number 1, we are attracting a masculine man. We are not going out of our way and seeking out a man. That is a man's position to pursue. It is our job to receive. So
I couldn't sleep last night and realized that I had a head of Napa cabbage in the fridge and hadn't made kimchi in a while, so I went downstairs and did exactly that.
Hi everyone! Today I wanted to sit down and talk all about the controversial topic of trad wives. Truthfully, don't believe I've ever actually called myself one. I have spoken about how I would like to be one and why I think that it is such a beautiful way to live.
Those were the voices of Tradwife influencers Esty Williams, Nara Smith, and Gwen the Milkmaid. And I'm Gwen McClure. Today on The Detail, we're looking at the phenomenon of Tradwives and their place in the culture wars. Catherine Jaser Morton writes about family life for New York Magazine. She's also done a PhD in sociology, studying momfluencers.
Tradwives as a term has really only emerged in the last couple of years. It describes something that's been around forever, but I think it's specifically describing an internet phenomenon, which is women who are performing a very traditional version of wifehood and motherhood, and they're doing it on TikTok or on Instagram, and they're kind of demonstrating how it's done. And in so doing, they're kind of reviving these like fairly old-fashioned ideas about what wifehood and motherhood is. So a lot of it has to do with, being a stay-at-home mother, being sort of provided for by a husband, and sometimes even being submissive to the husband, although not always. And a lot of kind of from scratch cooking and, kind of homemaking that looks kind of labor intensive.
The so-called queen of Tradwives is Hannah Nealman. You may recognize her from this viral clip of her unwrapping her birthday present from her husband.
It was my birthday present from Daniel. Hoping their tickets to Greece. Ooh! A hat I can wear in Greece.
It's not a hat.
It's not? Oh, my A-apron!
Eggs in it.
Great, I didn't gather eggs. You're welcome.
Thanks, honey.
The really big one that everyone's talking about right now is a woman named Hannah Nealman, who posts under the name Ballerina Farm on Instagram and TikTok. And she doesn't actually apply that term to herself, but other people apply it to her. And she's considered the queen of the tradwives right now, but she would probably say, no, I'm not a tradwife at all.
Tell me some of the details of her life that kind of put her in that box, or maybe don't put her in that box.
Hannah grew up in a traditional Mormon household in Utah, and she comes from a large family, which is typical of like more traditional Latter-day Saints families. But something that's a little bit maybe unusual, although not entirely, was that she was pursuing a career in ballet. She got into Juilliard, which is the sort of best music and dance college program, university program in the United States, I would say, one of them. So it's really hard to get into, and she got in and she got a scholarship, and so she flew to New York City, and she was going to be a ballerina. And then she met a man who's also a Mormon named Daniel Nealman, and they met, I think, maybe before her last year of college. And she's very lovely, and she dances in front of the camera sometimes. So we see that she's a beautiful, gifted dancer. And they have a business. Their business is called Ballerina Farm, and they sell all kinds of meat that they grow on the farm and dairy products and all kinds of things like that. So they have a business that she's promoting with her account, Ballerina Farm. And all of these details that I'm sharing right now just came to light really in a big viral article by a journalist named Megan Agnew, which was in the Times of London.
Here's Megan Agnew zooming in from New York.
So Ballerina Farm is this enormous online influencer, essentially. She has 9 million followers on Instagram, and she posts about family life in Utah with her 8 children and her husband. And it's super earthy. It's sort of super outdoorsy. The kids are homeschooled. There are animals everywhere. It looks beautiful and everything just kind of feels idyllic and peaceful and perfect.
I'm with my family every day. We work together, we learn together, we struggle together. We share countless priceless moments that very few people in this world get to have. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Earlier in the North American summer, Megan spent a day with Hannah Nealman and her husband Daniel and their 8 children.
She had faced a fair amount of criticism online and these sort of periods when she went quite viral and was attacked for making motherhood look too easy, for promoting a sort of really traditional lifestyle at home when it came to gender roles. And up until that point, and also because she'd performed at Mrs. World 12 days after having a baby in January. And up until that point, she hadn't commented on anything. Like, she'd barely acknowledged any of it. And she just carried on, which in a world of sort of like influencers constantly apologizing things and checking themselves and talking about it, I thought it was quite unusual. And so I was kind of expecting her to be like really dug in about her opinions and how she felt about her way of life. And she wasn't. She was much softer, and she was much more passive, I think, than I thought she was going to be, particularly within the role of the company. She is the face of it and really was the brains behind putting it all on Instagram, but leading from the front for sure when it comes to the farming and the family's lifestyle seemed to be her husband, Daniel, who was around too when I was there.
Yeah, tell me about Daniel and what your interactions with him were like.
Daniel is from a super wealthy background and grew up in Connecticut. His father founded JetBlue and various other sort of commercial airlines. And he actually had a really suburban life. Like, they didn't have any animals. His dad commuted to work in New York City. And he just dreamt of this like enormous, brave existence in the American West and of sort of like this pioneering existence, really. And it's very old-fashioned and romanticizing of the old-fashioned lifestyle. You know, I write about it in the article. He did answer a lot for her when I asked her questions. And he'd sort of say we, and she would say I afterwards and say something slightly different. So he was quite, he just led, I suppose. That was how it felt.
Your headline is Meet the Queen of the Tradwives and her 8 children. What do you think puts her in that tradwife box?
I think how I define tradwives are people who are living lifestyles within the home which adhere to traditional gender stereotypes and are then living that life publicly and promoting it publicly online. And that is central to the brand.
And Hannah doesn't describe herself as a tradwife, right?
No. She said that she doesn't feel aligned to the term tradwife because she has her own company. And Daniel said sort of, you know, if we're trad dad and trad wife, then so be it, essentially.
Many readers agreed with Daniel on that, honing in on the details that land Hannah squarely in the tradwife camp. Some of those, yes, her competing in a pageant 2 weeks after giving birth to her 8th child.
I included a number of details that we spoke about and that she told me and that they told me. And then they've sort of taken on a life of their own as it can do on TikTok. But the things that have been repeated often is the fact that when Daniel was working and he couldn't be at home for the birth of one of her children was when she went to the hospital and had an epidural and she'd had her other children without pain relief. Another thing is her sort of giving up dance and her having wanted a ballet studio in their sort of estate, I guess, on their farm estate. And it was sort of turned into a schoolroom, a children's schoolroom. And also Daniel said that she works so hard
because she uploads all the content at night after the kids have gone to bed. She does it all herself still. That she sometimes just gets really ill for a week and just can't get out of bed.
But many mothers and parents can relate to a lot of this. Feeling so exhausted you could spend a week in bed, giving up on your dreams because they conflict with the reality of raising a family, and of course, not having enough help. Though that's not the whole picture for Ballerina Farm.
And they do have babysitters intermittently who are like, you know, kids from church who help out. And they have loads of people on the farm, but they really genuinely don't have nannies. And Daniel's is genuinely like super engaged, but he's like nursing the child and taking the others out with him on the farm, and they're all like mucking in. It's not like Hannah is the only person like slaving away over all these kids. It is a dual partnership, but they just have very distinct roles within it, as many people do.
The reaction to your article has been strong on both sides. Were you expecting that? Were you expecting it to be so divisive?
It's so polarized. It is so polarized. It's extraordinary. In the US, there's a huge conversation at the moment about childless people and whether they have a stake in the country or not, as per various Republican arguments. J.D. Vance talking about Kamala Harris being a childless cat lady, then the backlash to all of that, and then still heated conversations about reproductive freedoms. It's a really heated debate from two very extreme distant sides, and that was sort of transplanted onto this. Some people saying that she was deeply unhappy and that she must hate it, which was a reading of my article, which isn't what I said at all. And the other side saying that I didn't have the right to have interviewed her, or that I was lying in some way. We have obviously audio recordings of all of it. And then those people then fighting with one another. And it just comes down to choice, really. And people, one half saying that just because you've made this decision to live this life, it doesn't mean that it's a decision of freedom. You're still oppressed in some way by this sort of like misogynistic gender roles. And then the other side saying, no, I did choose it. And that in itself is a feminist free act, and I'm able to. But it's really personal. It comes down to how we choose to reproduce, who we choose to reproduce with, when, why, how other people judge us for doing so, how we sustain that, how we make money. It's really like, it couldn't get much more personal. So I think that's probably why too it has been such a, at times, vicious debate, actually.
Massey University researchers Sophia Sykes and Veronica Hopner wrote a thesis about Tradwives as right-wing influencers. Sophia spoke with Jesse Mulligan on RNZ Afternoons.
What about this confluence of Tradwives with right-wing extremism? Are all Tradwives right-wing? Are they all right-wing extremists, or is there just a little sort of intersection there?
So the way that we found, there was quite a landscape of these women. And so we kind of classified them in kind of three different groups that kind of are existing in that more extreme right-wing space. Not necessarily all of them are right-wing extremists, but the way that we classified them was conservative right, alt-right, and then alt-right, which is where you kind of get that more extreme iteration. So yeah, a range.
Here's Catherine Jaser-Morton again.
As far as alt-right politics, I think that's a lot more of this kind of pernicious under the surface stuff where it's never talked about. The Neilmans never ever talk about politics, and I doubt they ever would. That's terrible for their brand to do that, because the United States is super polarized. So, if they were to like endorse a political party, they would lose a lot of followers. And so a lot of influencers just don't even go there. But it is there. It's bubbling under the surface all the time, right? Like the family planning stuff, the no abortion stuff, the traditional gender roles stuff. All of this. These are really important parts of the kind of alt-right, and in some ways bubbling into the more kind of conservative party system in the United States, the Republican Party. And so even if it's not talked about overtly, all of the little markers are legible, and you can't deny that they're there.
So is it oppression? Submission? Can someone be a tradwife and not be subordinate to their husband?
That's the question, I think, at the heart of this whole debate around this woman. And I wrote for The Cut about this, and I indicated that, two things can be true at the same time, right? She can be co-CEOs with her husband, which I believe is true. She can be not submissive in terms of their daily life of running the business, of, getting through the day, of who's going to change the diapers. I believe that she feels that they have a very kind of good and healthy and satisfying kind of division of labor. That being said, when you have 8 kids, when you're not using birth control it's unclear, but it seems as though that's not part of the deal there. If abortion is frowned upon in anything other than like an emergency situation, your reproductive reality means that you are in some way submissive to the fact that you're going to be keeping on having kids. So, I think both things are true. I think to her, she feels that this is a beautiful life that she's built. And I grant her that. I don't think that she's lying or that she's even delusional. This is her, this is what she thinks. But I also believe that objectively, that's a submissive situation that she's in.
Then there are the tradwife influencers who openly advertise their submission to their husbands.
So last year I made a new account called Gwen the Milkmaid. No, it's not sexual, okay, because I saw that recently. I dream of having a farm and having cows and being a milkmaid.
Gwen the Milkmaid is a beautiful former OnlyFans content creator who wears farm-style sexy dresses. Her posts usually show her in the kitchen or skipping around her garden, and the captions include, quote, "When your husband asks for a yogurt parfait and you happily do as he says," and "Point of view, you take your job as your husband's personal chef seriously."
I think most of the people that are following Ballerina Farm are women. That's women who are interested in the lifestyle that a lot of it's very aesthetic. The clothes she wears, it's quite a specific sort of style.
Catherine says Gwen the Milkmaid has a different audience.
So I think that the most, if not most, a good healthy chunk of the people who are following Gwen the Milkmaid are men, who are turned on by her or for whom she does something, because it's a very kind of sexy, like campy, sexy thing that feels coded towards a more of a masculine gaze. Hannah Nealman really feels like she's performing for her fellow cis ladies. But yeah, so Gwen the Milkmaid, there's something in a certain kind of tradwife niche that you see a little bit more on TikTok that is almost like a bit fetishistic. Like it's almost like a kink where it's this kind of watch a woman carefully prepare the home for you. Almost like an ASMR experience.
What is ASMR? Well, it stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, a corner of the internet where video makers record themselves whispering into the camera. It supposedly triggers a tingling response. Millions of people are mesmerized by it.
Hi. No, it's okay. You can keep sleeping. I didn't mean to wake you. You just look so sweet and cozy.
Which I see as something that will be more appealing to like younger men who might not have a whole lot of experience with real life female partners. Maybe that's just me being uncharitable, but yeah, it's a fantasy of a kind of femininity that feels like you don't actually see it in the wild that often.
Yeah, interesting as well about Gwen the Milkmaid. My understanding is that she's fairly new to this tradwife life or content production, and that her history is very different than that.
Right. Yes. She was just like kind of a fun, she was a bit more of a fun, zany. I think she identified as bisexual. Did she do ASMR before?
I think so. Yeah, had an OnlyFans.
Yeah, it was a little bit more kind of overtly sexual in the kind of traditional OnlyFans kind of way. And then she kind of pivoted to a more trad, but like I said, I think it's still like erotic, just in a bit of a different way to do with like these sort of maybe a bit more modesty, but still very kind of sexualized. And I mean, I wonder if she's just a very savvy content creator who saw an opportunity, maybe like, I mean, one thing I know about being a momfluencer and a content creator in general is that your niche fills up and then suddenly your content is not seen as much. Like you're constantly fighting for eyeballs in everything that you do. And, it could be that she just was like not finding that the OnlyFans stuff was performing as well and she needed a new angle. And the whole Tradwife thing, she jumped on it relatively early and it really blew up. I mean, if that were the case, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Is there an irony that these Tradwives are commodifying their rejection of modern life by using social media? So their whole traditional wife thing is actually paying them. It's likely that they're not living off of their husband's income in a traditional wife way.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of people identify that irony, or maybe, they call it a kind of hypocrisy that comes from, claiming to be submissive or in some way supported by your husband, for example, and then, monetizing content about that very thing. I don't think that there's anything really surprising about that, considering that like so much of what people do now is monetized, that, this is just the world we live in, really. And for better or for worse, that's just how it goes down. But I mean, I do think that that is one of the reasons why this topic is so kind of confounding to people, and it pushes those buttons, where it's like, how can you say that you're traditional if you have a camera stand and you're like editing video for half the day? Because also, like, remember, producing this content is a ton of work. So like they are spending time on the production of it that's taking away from whatever traditional activities that they claim to be doing.
But there is a dark side to all of this.
I do feel that something about Hannah Nealman and Ballerina Farm is stirring up like what could almost be called a moral panic. And there might be a like low-key moral panic flavor about Tradwives in general. And I only say this because every time I write about this topic, and I know my colleagues who work at other publications, it's the same for them, these articles do crazy numbers. Like people want to read about Tradwives and people want to talk about it. There's something about it that's really, really sticky for people. And, a moral panic usually emerges from like existing real anxieties in a society in a given moment. Like I'm thinking about in the 80s in the United States, there was like this moral panic about satanic cults, and everyone was talking about satanic cults and how like children were being lured into them. And it was a huge media thing. There were no satanic cults. It was fake. And I know Tradwives are kind of real and that they do exist on social media and they kind of exist in the real world too. But there's something a little bit linked in my mind about that, because it's like we're scared of something or we're worried about something and it's real and it's to do with change and threats to, all kinds of rights. And these Tradwives are representing that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're so compelled by them.
That's all for this week. The Detail is a newsroom production funded by RNZ and NZ On Air. Thank you to Megan Agnew and Catherine Jaser-Morton. This episode was engineered by Alex Harmer and produced by Alexia Russell and Davina Zimmer. I'm Gwen McClure. Ka kite anō.